I get a lot of music theory questions here, and the question I get more than any other is, what the heck is going on in the pre-chorus from Now You're Gone by Whitesnake? So this week, I'll finally answer that question. Then, we'll take a look at the related horror film, Lair of the White Worm. Here we go. I'm Carl King, and this is the Carl King Podcast, where every week we learn about music, filmmaking, and the other creative arts. If you like this show, head over to patreon.com/Carl King and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Special thank you to my Illusionist, $51 level patrons, both Hank Howard III and Chew Bode. Quick shout out to my music endorsements, Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Tune Track, and Millennium Media. Now, let's get this episode beginned. Just a few Carl King the Human updates, and then we will officially get beginned. Number one, last week I released a new short video demonstrating Vienna Symphonic Library and answering the question, what is Stravinsky's Petrushka chord? And within one day, it became my most viewed video of all time. As of right now, it's got over 28,000 views across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And this week we're putting out another one, so stay tuned. And I will put a link to those videos in the show notes. Number two, my physical copy of Who Cares Anyway by Will York arrived this past week. The book is over 500 pages and explores the early history of Bay Area bands, including one of my favorites, Mr. Bungle. My old interviews with the band members are referenced throughout the book, and I had no idea that was happening until I read it. Mr. York has also just released a related podcast interview with Trey, and I will put a link to both the book and the interview in the show notes. Number three, I've started writing my first official creative musician course called What the Heck is Music? And as of now, I'm estimating it will be about 2 hours of video content along with musical examples and simple notation. And when it's done, it will be available only through Patreon. And in the meantime, subscribers can read the rough draft of the script, which I just posted on Friday. And now, let's get into this week's analytical musical analysis of the week. This week's analytical music theory analysis of the week is Now You're Gone from Whitesnake's 1989 album Slip of the Tongue, and that features Steve Vai on guitar. And today we're going to focus only on the pre-chorus chord progression, which has baffled countless listeners ever since it was first released. And the examples you'll hear and see on the screen are simplified for the sake of explanation. But to set the context, we need to know what comes before the pre-chorus. And that is the verse, which also serves as the song intro, and it is a safe, tonal chord progression in the key of C major. The chords go something like C major, G major, D minor, back to G, and some variations of that. It's your basic 1-5-2-5, and it is a very traditional progression you'll hear in thousands or millions or billions or trillions of songs, but not quadrillions yet. But now that we know the verse is in C major, let's dive into that mysterious pre-chorus. It has a very simple 3-note bass movement: A, D, and F. The A is held for 2 measures, and the D and F are 1 measure each. like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, those bass notes alone, D, F, and A, would outline a D minor triad, but that really means nothing. It's the unexpected chords on top that we will pay close attention to. In measure 1, we have an A minor, and then an F over A. And in A minor, that's a minor tonic to a major submediant. So these first few chords make perfect sense to our ear. We're in A minor, but notice that the F chord is in first inversion because the bassist, Rudy Sarzo, is staying on A for the entire measure. He's playing what could be called a pedal tone or a rock and roll pedal tone. That's where the guitar changes chords, but the bass doesn't. Now this is creating tense slash chords, where the triad in the upper voices is dissonant over the bass note. It's a very Van Halen thing to do, but it also happens in Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple from 1972. And coincidentally, David Coverdale was also in that band, but not during that time. Do you happen to know of an earlier musical example of the rock and roll pedal tone? And classical music doesn't count, by the way, but if so, let me know. Now, the only other thing notable harmonically is David Coverdale's vocals, because he's singing a G note as a pickup note to that first A note, making that first chord kind of an A minor 7. Moving on to measure 2, we have a similar situation. The bass stays on A, but the guitar now plays the chords A minor and G over A. And that's sort of a G major chord with a ninth in the bass, or an A chord with a 4, a flat 7, and a 9, because that's the notes A, G, B, and D. And I don't know what jazz even is, so if you know the jazzy name of that chord, let me know in the comments. The most obvious and easiest way to think of it is a G over A, because that's exactly what it is in this song context. But overall, we are still in a straightforward, normal minor tonality. That's the minor tonic moving to major subtonic. And once again, David Coverdale is singing a G note, which is the minor 7 over A. Now in measure 3, this is where things get confusing. The bass guitar moves to the D note, and it kind of sounds like something important is happening. The chord progression is going off somewhere new, and they made that change have more impact by holding off changing the bass note until that very chord in measure 3. And the guitar plays a D minor chord, which makes sense because D minor is in the key of A minor. It would be a minor subdominant chord. But the next chord is B flat major over D. So something is happening here, because a B flat major chord and even the B flat note itself is not in the key of A minor. It definitely messes with our ear, because in the previous measures, we already had the notes C and B natural. So having 3 notes chromatically in a row, that's a hint that something non-diatonic is happening. And what would this chord be theoretically in the key of A minor? It would be a flat major supertonic. But that chord does not exist in A minor. There is no flat major supertonic in a minor key. And this got me to thinking, aha, we must be in Phrygian, because in the Phrygian mode, there is a flat major supertonic. And that would mean that 2 weeks in a row, we encounter a song in the Phrygian mode. Since this song is from 1989, Secret Chiefs must have been influenced by them. And as Hermes Trismegistus said, after this, therefore because of this. But the problem with saying this pre-chorus is in A Phrygian is that the G major chord, that major subtonic, doesn't belong. In Phrygian, that chord would have to be a G minor. Well, something else must be going on. And it took me a while of messing with these chords to realize that starting in measure 3, they're just plain old hard modulating up a fourth to the key of D minor. So the chord progression in D minor would then be D minor to B flat major, which is the minor tonic to major submediant. And that B flat major chord is B flat over D, or B flat major in first inversion. To add to the color of that B flat over D, David Coverdale is singing the G note as a neighboring tone, which is a major sixth above B flat, resolving to F, the fifth of the chord. Now, Cubase told me that this chord is momentarily G minor 7 over D, because those notes in that moment would be G, B flat, D, and F. But I would not bother thinking of it that way because that G is really just a neighboring tone embellishment. Still, it's an important note on a strong beat. Then in measure 4, the bass guitar moves to an F note, and they again use that B flat note from the previous measure, which is now the sus4 on top of F, played by the guitar. And that resolves down to a major third A in a simple F major triad. In the early demo version of this song, in this measure, guitarist Adrian Vandenberg, or whoever was playing guitar at that moment, it's debatable, played a simple rock and roll B flat major to F. And it seems that when Steve Vai recorded his parts, he just blurred those two chords together into a more ambiguous F sus4 to F. So let's sum up what happened. This pre-chorus has two measures in the key of A minor, and then two measures in the key of D minor. Now, once that modulation became clear to me, I realized something else, that the melody and chords are disguising a 1, 6, 3, 7, or in the relative major, the 6, 4, 1, 5, which has been jokingly referred to as the sensitive female chord progression. It's 4 measures of it. First, 2 measures in A minor, and then 2 more measures of it up a fourth in D minor. And in fact, the vocal melody completely fits with the sensitive female chord progression, so let's hear both. First, here's the Whitesnake version of the chords and melody. And now here it is with the sensitive female chord progression. But notice how clean and happy the sensitive female chord progression sounds under this, rather than all that tension and darkness and harmonic richness in the Whitesnake version. Here's the Whitesnake version again. Now here's some trivia about the sensitive female chord progression. It's also featured in the first few measures of the chorus of the song Poison by Alice Cooper. And coincidentally, that's a song related to snakes. Although there, it's in the keys of G minor, and C minor. It's that same modulation of the sensitive female chord progression up a fourth. But anyway, that's it for the mysterious pre-chorus. Did David Coverdale and Adrian Vandenberg know they were doing all of this from a theoretical standpoint? I doubt it. It's more likely they were rock and rollers playing it all by ear. But they must have had dang good ears. And to give you some more songwriting context, for the chorus they modulate again to the key of D major. But it begins with the chord G major, which is the 4 chord in D major. And that transition is smoothed out because the last chord of the pre-chorus is F major, and it simply moves up a whole step to G major. So to review, there are 3 parts to this song, all in different keys. The verse is in simple C major, and the pre-chorus modulates to A minor, and then up a fourth to D minor. And that's a smart songwriting move because we've gone from a consonant key to a dissonant key, tension, and then to D major for the chorus. So we've released the tension and we are back to consonants again. So it goes consonant, dissonant, consonant, which is sort of an ABA of tonality, which is perfect for a power ballad. Now here are some compositional songwriting takeaways. Number 1, pedal tones and slash chords. To create some tension, keep that bass voice or bass guitar the same while changing the chords over top of it. It's very Van Halen and clearly also very Whitesnake. Number 2, if you have a standard, obvious chord progression, like the sensitive female chord progression, you can add harmonic richness and ambiguity by disguising it. The melody can still outline those chord tones, but you can make the chords under it more murky and dense while still in the same diatonic key. Number 3, throw in some non-chord tones like neighboring tones and suspensions in the middle voices to keep the tonality from being so nursery rhyme major chordy. Number 4, for different parts of a song, alternate between major and minor keys. That way you're playing with tension and release on a macro level. And number 5, a song can never have too many modulations or too many Steve Vai guitar parts. I love this entire Whitesnake album, Slip of the Tongue, and I recommend you listen to it through headphones to hear all the details. But make sure it's the original 1989 version, even though the most recent deluxe edition has some rough mixes included. They also made some seriously questionable edits to the main songs, in my own totally subjective, personal, female opinion. And now, let's get into this week's analytical filmmaking analysis of the week. This week's analytical filmmaking analysis of the week is Lair of the White Worm from 1988, written and directed by Ken Russell, based on the novel of the same name by Bram Stoker. And coincidentally, watching this film is how David Coverdale came up with the band name Whitesnake. I'm going to break down my observations on this film into 3 categories. Number 1, the screenwriting. Number 2, the cinematography. And number 3, the implausibilities. First up, the screenwriting. Now, remember, screenwriting is not just dialogue. It's also the creation of the story. The characters, the location, the plot, the structure, the meaning. So my main observation is that the screenwriting of this story could have been tightened up. The first reason is there are 4 protagonists, 2 women, 2 men, and there's nothing all that detailed or distinct about any of them. Some of the characters could have been combined for both storytelling and production efficiency. It could have been cut down to 2 protagonists, because in several scenes, 1 or 2 of the characters are sent off to do something inconsequential like take a nap or have a sandwich, which is evidence we don't need that many characters. Especially considering this is a plot-driven film, we don't need that many chess pieces. Had this been a character-driven film with the protagonists exploring their internal and interpersonal conflicts, you can get away with that, as long as each character has a unique point of view and psychological depth. But this film gets muddy because it doesn't follow a single character's point of view. First, it's the story of an archaeologist, but more characters are introduced, and soon we're not sure who this story is actually about. We don't know whose eyes we are experiencing it through. Sometimes it even feels like it's from the villain's point of view, and I think it would have been a powerful film if they leaned into that. You can have a film with changing points of view, but in this case it just seems inconsistent and unintentional. Second, there is an incredible amount of exposition. For instance, early in the film, there's an Irish dance song and theatrical performance, and the lyrics tell us the legend of the white worm. So, we get it. There's a white worm, and it has something to do with snakes and vampires, but in the first 14 minutes, almost nothing happens. It's just people talking about things that happen somewhere else. And on the topic of exposition, this film is bloated by dialogue scenes. The majority of the film is people standing around or walking around and talking to each other. There's a scene where one of the women goes upstairs to take a nap, which is very exciting, and then she has a psychedelic experience, and she comes back downstairs and then tells the other character what just happened, as if we didn't just see it happening. If I were a tyrannical studio executive, I'd demand that they cut out at least 50% of the dialogue. Since film is a visual medium, our brains want to see things happening in real time, not hear someone talking about them. And there's a concept mentioned in the screenwriting book, Save the Cat, and it's called the promise of the premise. And I watched this film because of a still image of that vampire snake lady with the blue face and yellow eyes and fangs. And I thought, now that looks fun. But if I had to guess, maybe 5 minutes of this 90-minute movie had that visual in it. There are 2 or 3 hallucinatory dream sequences with striking visuals, and they reminded me of the Holy Mountain. But they're only brief flashes, maybe 30 seconds long each. The rest of the time, it's just normal humans not doing much. Drinking tea, wandering around. The film could have used way more of those surreal visuals. That is, if the screenwriter cared about that promise of the premise. And third, there are a lot of non sequiturs, or seeming non sequiturs, in this film. A non sequitur is Latin for does not follow. That's when something doesn't make any sense. For instance, in one of the early scenes, a character trips over a garden hose in the yard, and there's a loud Mickey Mouse horror chord. Why? And then this happens again when a character trips over a vacuum cleaner hose. I don't know, maybe these are supposed to be symbolic of a snake? But later, a character trips and falls into a drum set, which just happens to be in the middle of the room. So there's a lot of tripping and falling in this film. Now, let's focus on the second category of my notes, the cinematography and editing. Most of these scenes are with a single master wide shot on tripod. When there's more than 1 or 2 characters in a room, the camera will sit there rather than cutting to close-ups. There might be some minimal panning of the wide shot on the tripod as a character will move way to one side of the shot. So a lot of it felt like watching a two-dimensional theater play on a stage, rather than creating depth by moving the camera in a three-dimensional space. And the actors also spoke loudly as if projecting to a theater audience. Although there was at least one really well-composed shot at 20 minutes, 14 seconds, which was a close-up on the skull with the villain woman way in the background. There is a filmmaking term called shoe leather, and I think it comes from old detective films where the camera would follow a detective walking from place to place. And we spend a lot of time on shoe leather in this film. Efficient cinematography and editing will cut from one essential shot to the next, because the viewer doesn't need to watch a character pull up in their car, shut the engine off, open the door, step out of the car, close the door, walk across the street to where they're going. But this film is full of that. Characters walking through the woods, walking up and down the stairs in a house, opening and closing doors, walking through a cave. Unless it's intended to build anticipation, we don't care about how characters get from one place to another. It would actually be kind of funny to make a cut of this film with only those shoe leather shots. There's that saying, when in doubt, cut it out. Because these unnecessary shots suggest a low-budget, amateurish quality. Now, let's talk about some implausibilities. We know we're watching fiction, but these implausibilities are things that defy physics or human psychology. The local cop named Ernie goes to investigate an abandoned house, and out in the yard, he gets bitten by a snake, because snakes, I guess. Then a lady comes out of nowhere, and suddenly it sounded like there's reverb on their voices, and I'm not sure why, because they're outside. The woman then sucks the venom out of his ankle, and he thinks nothing of it. Now, first of all, why did she suck the venom out of his ankle? And why wouldn't he be surprised by that? Here's a little bit of trivia. That cop was played by Paul Brook, who everyone out there will recognize as the Rancor Keeper in Return of the Jedi. Another implausibility, when Hugh Grant visits Lady Sylvia, the vampire, in her lair, he doesn't seem to think it's unusual that there's no furniture in the place. For instance, in the living room, she only has pillows on the floor, and he sits down on them like that's totally normal. It makes me wonder, was this all because the film had no budget for furniture? And why didn't she bite him right then? Why let him leave? There's another scene that begins with a shot of a closed UV tanning bed, and a pair of hands open it from the inside, and it's the vampire, Lady Sylvia, completely nude. And it turns out that she has hypnotized a female victim who's standing there in the room. As if she said, okay, now that I've hypnotized you, if you could just stand here for a while, I need to tan myself. Lady Sylvia then gives a monologue explaining that she needs to sacrifice a virgin to her god, the White Worm. And this scene makes absolutely zero real-world sense, aside from delivering exposition and nudity. Well, there's plenty of filmmaking lessons to take from this work of filmmaking. And overall, did I enjoy Lair of the White Worm? Not really, but now I'm definitely interested in reading the Bram Stoker novel that this was based on. Wikipedia actually says it is widely considered one of the worst books ever written. Since Lair of the White Worm is a cult classic, and because it has a great thumbnail on Apple TV, I gave this film 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. Okay, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or anywhere else you listen to these dang podcasts. And if you like this show, support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. As always, special thank you to my $51 a month patrons at the Special Illusionist level, Chubode and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for listening. And as I always say, got a Whitesnake mama, you want to shake it mama.